clipping on purpose, isn't that something that we're supposed to avoid at all costs in our mixes? Well, I'm going to show you how you can actually use clipping in your mix, and I don't just mean only on your master bus, as a tool for loudness, impact, and punch. Hey guys, so look, every beginner audio engineer realizes at some point that their mix that they just finished isn't anywhere close to as loud as it needs to be compared to commercial mastered records. So what do? You dive in, you start looking things up, and you probably discover that limiting is the way to get more loudness. And so you start throwing different limiters on your overall mix, but you still can't even get really close to the loudness that you need. And when you try to get there, it just totally ruins your mix. So you lose all the impact and punch, especially from the drums, and things just get kind of smeary and bad. For example, there's a mix. So again, I had this problem for years, and this is how I tried to solve it. And this is how I saw other people do it as well. You break out a limiter, and L2 is classic choice here. And you just start bringing down this threshold. Now, watch out, it's going to get loud here. So on the transients, we're now doing a few dB of limiting on here, but we're still not at the loudness of a commercial record. And listen to the AB on this. You know, if we bring it down so that we have a volume match here, just to make it easier for you to hear. You can hear how the drums just go way back in the mix. They lack all of that nice attack and punch that we work so hard for. It's like, oh, there we have some nice attack. The snare almost disappears, and this is a classic problem. And like I said, I struggled with this for years. It just makes things sound worse. So that doesn't work. And I struggled for a while without knowing any solution to this, until one of my favorite producers at the time, his name's Andreas Magnuson, he kind of mentored me virtually just through sending me messages on the Gearsluts forum. I would ask him questions, he would answer. And he told me that when he sent mixes to the band, like as reference to get mix notes, you know, in order to get the volume up so that it was at least in the ballpark of commercial mixes, just so that the band wasn't reacting to a lack of loudness, instead of using limiting, he would just use clipping on the mix to get that volume up. And I was like, what? Clipping? You know, what are you talking about? And he told me, yeah, you know, as long as it's only clipping off, you know, the top or the front end of the drum transients. And he told me, yeah, as long as you just chop off the front end or the kind of the peak of the transients of the drums, well, you don't really hear the distortion. You don't notice it as audible clipping, and it's a more transparent way to get that loudness up. So I went back to Pro Tools and tried that for myself, and you know, this is literally what I did. I didn't have, you know, a clipping plugin, so I literally just grabbed the trim plugin in Pro Tools and I just cranked it up until I was clipping. So let's check this out. Let me bring this down. And right away, I realized, like, hey, that is a lot better. I mean, it just sounds like my same mix, but louder. It's not affecting, you know, how upfront and punchy the drums are. Like, they still sound aggressive. I still get that attack that I worked for. And it's not affecting, like, the balance of the rest of my mix either. So for a while, this is literally what I did. I would just throw on this Pro Tools trim plugin at the end of my mix bus and just crank it up until I had, you know, a competitive loudness. And you'd be surprised how far you can push this. I mean, let's push it a little bit more. The more you push it, you're going to start hearing it a little more on lower frequencies, and especially if you push it to the point where the drum transients, you know, the amount that they're peaking above the mix, they're cut off to the point where you start clipping, you know, the other instruments, and then you start hearing the nastiness. But I mean, if you listen to this, it's like, it sounds pretty clean. Now again, if we compare this to the L2, so if we try to get similar loudness on the limiter, let's see if we're in a similar ballpark here. All right, so listen, this is the L2 first, so listen to the drums especially. Now listen to clipping instead. The clipping sounds way better. So if you've run into this same problem that I had for years of just trying to get my mixes loud and utterly ruining them in the process, well, try this out. You don't even need to have a fancy clipping plugin. You can literally just use, just a straight up digital clip by just cranking the gain on, a trim plugin, something like this in your DAW. And again, this was just something that I did when at the final stage when sending the mixes for approval, just get that loudness up so the band is not, why is this mix so quiet? It's so weak compared to something that's mastered. You don't want them distracted by that, so you at least want to get it in the ballpark. This is the best way to do it, I found. Now, these days, I use the Slate FGX plugin to do that, set to like a pretty hard clipping mode on there. But anyways, this is what I did for years, and it works. You can hear how much better it sounds here. But the next logical step is, if it works there on the mix bus, well, maybe I could kind of build some of that into my mix on the drum tracks themselves. And so I want to show you here how you can actually start using clipping on your drum bus to kind of accomplish the same thing, to give your drums that loudness in the mix without having all these, super hot transients that are, let's say triggering your mix bus compressor, because if you have your drums up really loud, you want them up front. Well, those transients is going to cause your mix bus compressor to clamp down more, and it might, give you some artifacts in your mix that you're not looking for, or it just becomes difficult to get the loud drums, but also everything else loud, right? So let's check out how we can use clipping on the drum bus. So in this case, I'm going to use this Boz digital clipper. By the way, I haven't really found a good clipping plugin that I love. I'm actually thinking of making one for my new plugin company. But I don't know, either the interface looks really bad, or it doesn't have the metering that I like, or it's like way too complicated. There's way too many options. I mean, this one's pretty good and simple, for illustration purposes. So let's check this out. Let me reset it here. So let's bring the ceiling down by, let's say 3 dB, and then let's push it up by, let's say 4. So we get a bit of clipping here. You can see how it's clipping, not a ton, but a fair bit on the snare. You can hear how it's keeping the snare, like the perceived volume and attack of the snare is still staying the same. Like it still sounds the same to my ears, and we still get that nice attack. But we're also bringing up the rest of the drums. You can hear how the cymbals and kind of all the in-between the kick and snare hits sounds louder as well. Meanwhile, if you look at our Pro Tools meter here, we're actually peaking at the exact same level. So we get a lot more perceived loudness this way. So I might not always clip quite that much on my drum bus, but maybe somewhere, something like this. So I'm just kind of taming the peaks a little bit. And then I'll also do that on a parallel compression bus as well. Maybe a little bit more on the parallel bus. Now, what does this do? Now we have kind of an output ceiling on those transients on the drums if we look at our mix bus meter over here. So what does that do? Now we've kind of prepared it a little more for the final loudness stages of mastering, because we've kind of set that ceiling there. So you'll notice that now we can probably get a lot louder with a lot less artifacts, like with a lot less gain reduction on this standard limiter here, which is still not what I would use anyway, but just for illustration purposes. Let's bring the whole mix in. We can get a lot more loudness without kind of sacrificing those transients, so that's going to help the mastering engineer as well. Now, as with anything else, I want to stress that this does not mean that the answer is just to clip your drums like crazy, okay? Like, yes, you could throw a clipper on your snare itself to get it louder. You could throw it on the snare and the drum bus and your parallel compression bus. You could throw it on other instruments with a lot of transients. But I'm not saying that this alone is the answer to get more loudness in your mixes. And I don't really do a ton of clipping in my mixes. Like what I just showed you, like maybe a little bit, just kind of shaving off the peaks on my drum buses. That's pretty much all I use it for in my mixes. But I can still get very loud mixes using a combination of compression, of saturation, distortion sometimes, and yes, a bit of clipping, and again, just practice of getting a good overall mix balance. This all works together to get you that loudness. So please don't take this as like an end-all, be-all solution, and don't use it like a sledgehammer, just clipping everything like crazy in your mix and making everything really crunchy and loud. But I hope this just gives you another avenue, another way to solve a common problem in your mixes. And as you heard here, for rock and heavy music, a lot of genres really where you have, at least somewhat aggressive drums, clipping sounds a lot better than limiting to get that loudness and energy up. Because if you're just kind of shaving off the front end of that drum hit or just the top peak of that transient, you're not going to hear it as audible distortion or clipping because it just happens so fast our ears can't really pick up on it. And so it allows you to maintain that punch and impact, maintain that aggression from the drums. Actually, it can even make it sound more aggressive because that really brief bit of distortion actually kind of adds some edge to the sound too. So hopefully you liked this video. Drop a comment for me to let me know if this cleared up some confusion for you when people are talking about clipping in the mix or clipping plugins, or why do mastering engineers use clipping. Well, I hope you gained a little bit of understanding from this video. And make sure you hit the subscribe button here so that you don't miss any future videos. And click the link to get on my email list. I'm about to open up my professional production system, my full suite of training and tracking, editing, and mixing, plus a ton of other stuff. It hasn't been open for over 6 months. We're about to open that up, but you got to get on the email list. Finally, if you're looking for more tips on how to get a tight, aggressive, punchy drum sound, then check out this video here for my specific approach to parallel drum compression. All right, take care.